Hello, and welcome to Healthy Kingston, a program of the Kingston Board of Health. I'm Janet Wade, your host. Today we're going to be talking about a very serious topic that unfortunately plagues our country and is certainly here in southern Massachusetts very much on the forefront of social issues that we're currently having, and that's domestic violence. Domestic violence is committed by someone in a person's domestic circle. So it can be a partner, a former partner, a relative, a family friend, but someone within your domestic circle. There are actually 4 different types of domestic violence. There's physical, obviously, or bodily harm. There's sexual, which is when the act isn't consensual. There's psychological, which we might all be becoming more familiar with. It's harm to the person. It's either verbal harm, manipulating them, intimidating them, maintaining some kind of control over them, which certainly is foremost in social media these days. And then lastly, economic violence. Domestic violence is highest among women. About 85% of domestic violence cases involve women, usually young women between the ages of 18 and 25, and then there's also the group between 25 and 35. And they're most likely abused by an intimate partner. 1 in 3 young adults is in a healthy, abusive relationship. That is a very scary statistic. 43% of dating college students report experiencing violent or abusive dating behavior. And a lot of that is physical, as I mentioned, digital or social media, verbal controlling abuse. Some of you may be aware of a study that was done by the Centers for Disease Control quite recently. We're filming the week of February 13th, and this article came out then with a very disturbing statistic, and that 3 out of 5 teenage girls in this country are severely depressed, even to the point of suicide. Again, domestic violence has a lot to do with this statistic. Overall, more than 40% of boys and girls have said that they feel so sad or hopeless, and this has been within the past year, that they have considered suicide. So obviously, this sets the stage for a very serious topic that it impresses upon all of us to think about it and know the information, how to recognize it, and what to do if we see a situation. So I feel very fortunate today to be able to introduce you to 2 local experts who've been working in the area of domestic violence for a number of years. One of them is Sandra Blatchford, who is the program director for South Shore Resource and Advocacy Center, and from the Kingston Police Department, our own Lieutenant Mike Sclavera, who is a detective with the department and is a repeat guest. He's been here in the past, and very happy to have the 2 of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Janet.
First off, Sandra, local statistics, what are we looking at for numbers of cases?
So what we're looking at for Social Resource and Advocacy Center, that we cover 4 courts within Plymouth County. We cover the Hingham District Court, Wareham District Court, and then Plymouth Probate and Plymouth District Courts for our Safe Plan Advocacy, which provides advocates within the courts if someone's obtaining an abuse prevention order or a 25080 harassment order. And in fiscal year 22, we saw almost 1,000 petitioners come in seeking restraining orders. And for services, for our community-based and center-based services for domestic violence, we provide services generally between 80 to 130 people per month, and then for new people coming in for services last year, we saw 372 new people coming in, and then we have ongoing survivors who continue to seek services. So we basically will probably receive 1 new person per day if you look at the calendar year. And then we provide multitude of services to individuals throughout the year. And that, so the data is what we calculate as who's actually coming in for services or utilizing our remote services due to COVID. The numbers are continue to grow. We continue to see a lot more people coming in, and we also do have a child witness program where we had suspended it during COVID, so we're just starting to see more children come in, and then we're also starting to see more teens as well.
Do you see that the numbers that are the numbers reflected locally
Yes.
that are the same nationally?
What I would say is they are reflected. I think what's very difficult is getting the word out that our services are available. I think that there's oftentimes a lot of hesitancy to contact the agency because oftentimes what a survivor will say is, I'm afraid to call you because I think you're going to tell me to leave my partnership. And that is not what we do, that we do not advocate for people to stay or to leave, that we follow an empowerment, trauma-informed model. So we really work with the individual and work solely on what the individual is asking us. And so I think a lot of times what I try to get out is that contact the agency, that there is no expectation for someone to leave the relationship, that we really just provide a lot of safety planning and support, individual counseling and group counseling, and a lot of other services. We also have a transitional housing program. So we provide a lot of services to support, and everything's free and confidential. But when I look at the numbers and I see who's coming into the courts, we're reflective as a community, as we cover 18 towns in Plymouth County. So as a community, we are reflective of what's going on nationally.
I know I spoke to the fact that teenage girls, young women, are the highest numbers, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's understandable. And why do you see that as the case right now here?
Why I see that as the case is that what we've seen, and it's been a trend that has been occurring over actually the last 10 years, is that kids are starting to date early, 5th grade, and social media plays a very big role in teens' daily lives. That what we see is that the cell phone and social media have become almost like an appendage, and there's a lot of tracking that goes on. So especially for teen dating violent relationships, your partner is able to track you on your phone. You have geolocation on Snapchat. You know, everything, the person can track you and follow you. And then what gets placed on social media is always, no one ever really presents what's really maybe happening in my life. That every time you click on somebody, the picture may be touched up, that they're always happy, they're always with a group of people. And there's this expectation often placed on how a young woman should look, how she should dress, how popular you are, who you're hanging out with. And so much of what is presented and told to young women of what the expectation is that a lot of teens don't feel like, a lot of young girls don't feel like they can live up to that. And there's a lot of body shaming, there's social shaming, and it's an opportunity to be bullied through social media. It's much easier to say something very bad about someone if you're not saying it to their face. Yes, and that absolutely plays a key role. And then if you're in an abusive relationship, your self-esteem gets whittled away and your value gets whittled away. And oftentimes you're not believed, or you don't want to tell your parents or friends what's happening because you believe the abuser has convinced you that this is all your fault and that you are worthless. So, and they may be using social media to continue to degrade or send out pictures or do things that absolutely undermine a young woman's view of themselves and their self-worth.
Right. Right. I do want to touch upon what we were speaking about earlier as far as older women in the community who are established, who you'd think this could never be a problem with them.
And it's a significant problem. What we see, especially if you're looking at communities where there is a lot of wealth, that economic abuse is a very common form of abuse. And for professional women or who have partners who are also professional, and there's a significant income, significant status, that it's very embarrassing to disclose. The abuser has convinced their partner that you disclose, I will take everything. I will get custody of the children. I will ruin you. And very often, those are the statements that are being said to wealthier women or women who have status, that everything you have, I will take down. And what we've seen with abusers is that they are very capable of doing so, and that the outward presentation of an abuser is oftentimes the nicest person you're going to meet. Very charismatic, can bring people in, and oftentimes there's a lot of gaslighting that occurs. So the abuser has set up a picture that the victim starts to not trust what they're living or what they're seeing or what they're feeling. And the abuser is starting to set up by letting other people know, my partner has an anxiety disorder, my partner's crazy, my partner, she flips like this. And because abuse is about power and control, the abuser is maintaining that level of power and control the whole time, so appears to be the most rational person. So older women who may be more established feel as though no one's going to believe them, and they are at risk of exposing, they may have a high status in a job, may not want, there's a lot of embarrassment, and a lot of people might look at, well, how could you let that happen? You must be doing something, because here you are in this position and you're being abused. And what we see is oftentimes women won't seek out our agency, they won't contact the police, because the last thing you want is have a cruiser show up at your door, and you're in you could be in a closed community, a very wealthy neighborhood, and you're worried about the impact if you have children. Sure. And so oftentimes what we see is they'll seek out a doctor who may then medicate for anxiety, or they will seek out private alternatives, but may not disclose the abuse. They may just disclose the symptoms, and that would be anxiety, depression. And we also see that there's also been an increase sometimes of women also drinking and having a lot of, oftentimes it's social events with a lot of wine, and it's really to start masking all of the things that are happening in their lives.
Wow. That's a lot to digest. Lieutenant Sclavera.
Yes.
So, be interesting to hear things from your perspective.
Sure.
Typically, when does the police department get the call?
Unfortunately, I feel like most often it's in the emergency. It's the abuse has been ongoing for some time. Maybe it's just been verbal, maybe it's slowly escalated to physical, but most often it's the emergency situation where the abuse has become outwardly physical, and it's the 911 call, where now we're responding to, with cruisers, right, as Sandra said, with cruisers to the house, and possibly making an arrest or whatever it may be, depending on the circumstances. On occasion, we will get walk-ins to the front lobby, individuals seeking services, which if they are able to identify early on in the relationship, or maybe after an event occurs but they didn't call police at that time, but that they need help, that's, I think, best case scenario as far as, not having cruisers show up the house, something like that. Luckily, the public records law has been amended to block police departments from releasing domestic violence reports. With that in mind, that we don't want the general public knowing our personal business often. So there are protections like that where the police department won't tell people about individual domestic incidents. But talking statistics, I can tell you since January of 2020, the Kingston Police Department has responded to nearly 300 domestic events. That it varies widely from verbal domestics, where someone hears an argument or an involved party calls. Just it didn't escalate maybe to a crime, but it was definitely volatile and maybe indicative of domestic violence in the relationship, or all the way up to serious assaults, whether it be sexual in nature or just physical in nature. I say just, but sometimes these are very serious assaults resulting in injury. So sometimes arrests are made, or sometimes it's just a verbal, and we're just referring individuals for services.
You had mentioned walking through a call and typically what the police does and then how they interact.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say most commonly we receive a call for service, whether it's 911 or the business line. We get called to a house because of some sort of disturbance that's occurring. Most commonly, it's a domestic relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, something like that, where either it's just a verbal disturbance or a physical disturbance occurred. If a physical disturbance occurred, when we arrive, we're expected to ascertain who the primary aggressor is. So who mostly is responsible for the physical aggression that occurred. Maybe one person defended themselves and struck the other person back, or whatever it may be, but who's primarily responsible for the aggression. If physical violence did occur and we're able to identify who the primary aggressor is, which I would say often we are, usually an arrest is made. Almost exclusively an arrest is made. In fact, the law says the preferred response shall be arrest. So if that's what occurs, we would arrest that individual. They would be brought back to the police station, and simultaneously the victim is spoken to, right? So the victim would be asked to fill out a written statement, would be asked kind of what occurred, plus we would maybe take pictures as to any injuries, things like that. And then one of the more common things we ask victims if they would like to do, and that is sought after, is a restraining order. Typically, if it's a romantic relationship, it would be what we call a 209A abuse prevention order, and that's where the court issues an order telling the suspect in the case essentially to stay away from the victim, to not contact the victim, and a lot of the conditions of that order are sometimes decided by the victim. If they don't want a stay away, if they just want to no abuse, that's an option. Ultimately, the judge decides what gets ordered, but that's an option to the victims. And then most commonly, the next day is arraignment. So during arraignment, the suspect is arraigned on the charges, and it starts the long court procedure. But simultaneously, if an arrest occurred, the district attorney's office has a victim witness advocate that's assigned, that's a domestic violence advocate, and also Sandra's agency has advocates that can assist with restraining orders or assist with resources relative to maybe if they don't want to stay in the home, if the victim decides they want to leave, things like that. But then if an arrest didn't occur and the district attorney's office isn't involved and we're not involved as far as criminal charges, most commonly then those reports still would get sent to Sandra's agency, usually within a day, the next day, whatever it may be, to then offer services as well. And we also have paperwork that we give, usually both parties, as to what domestic violence rights exist for individuals, both by the statute and just local resources, not just Sandra's agencies, but other agencies as well. And there's also resources for the offenders as far as anger management classes and things like that to hopefully remedy that. Because we do understand that not everyone necessarily wants to leave the relationship, and we can't expect that of everyone. So there's also counseling options where maybe both parties participate, but our end goal being obviously that the violence stops.
Training that you go through to de-escalate the situations. Can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. I think most commonly the de-escalation process is similar to almost any other volatile or violent crime. But for police departments, we're all trained and well aware of the fact that domestic violence calls are one of the most dangerous calls we respond to. Police officers are killed every year at domestic violence calls because of the volatile nature of those calls, right? And often we also see that sometimes because of the emotional aspect of it, the victims or other parties involved may turn on the police. Sometimes it's an emotional thing. It's understandable that might occur. So we have to be careful how we respond to make sure that we maintain our own safety, the safety of the victim, the safety of other witnesses, of children, and things like that. But the goal always being to de-escalate and not have to use force. In those nearly 300 incidences that we went to since 2020, off the top of my head, I can't think of more than a handful that required any force at all. and that includes dozens of arrests that were made, where usually just our presence can de-escalate it, and it's a conversation, to separate the parties and de-escalate from there. Most commonly, it starts with separating everyone to de-escalate and start a conversation.
You make a very impressive case as to the rapport that's between the police department and the South Shore Resource and Advocacy Center. Is there anything further you want to say as far as once you get the information from the police department?
So once we get the information from the police department, we contact the named victim in the case. So what we will do is we will reach out and we will let the victim know that we received the report, and we then speak to the victim about what our services are. So that what we would say is that that we're here to listen, we're here to help, and our services do include individual counseling, support group. We do have a food pantry, a clothing closet, transitional housing, housing stabilization services, and we receive a grant from the United Way of Greater Plymouth to assist with housing stabilization and assisting with utility payments and other things like that. And we also receive funding from the Department of Public Health for the same, it's called housing stabilization. So if someone is experiencing economic abuse, we would have the opportunity to maybe assist with paying bills or helping someone pay for rent. We have a transitional housing program. So we really try to avail the victim of what all our services are, and that we still are offering either in-person or remote, so someone has that ability as well to decide what kind of services that they would like to receive. And we really explain our Safe Plan program if they decide to go into court, and we explain and we will meet people within the community they reside. So the advocate who actually covers Kingston would meet someone within the community, not at their home, but so that it's easier for that person to get services.
That's tremendous. I mean, to me, I would feel I'm not alone. I definitely have a tremendous support system out there if I'm willing to take advantage of it, which is tremendous. Any closing remarks either of you would like to make as far as people seeking your services, not being afraid to reach out, and also signs we might look for? What as we, as just good people in a community, do to help to start to diminish this problem?
I think for someone who is experiencing abuse, to really encourage that person to reach out, that they're not alone, and that we are here to safety plan, to listen. We even, if someone is in a really dangerous situation, we also have what's called emergency safe homing and hotline services, where we will respond immediately to someone. As far as the community, is that if you know someone and that person is disclosing to you that their partner may put them down, or you see somebody putting somebody down, calling them names, or someone who is living in fear of their partner, to let that person know that that's not okay, that an abuse is never their fault, because so much of what an abuser tells a victim is that everything that is happening is because of something that they did, that it's all their fault, and that being abused is not your fault. It never is. No one deserves to be abused.
Well, and that's a good way to end. Abuse is never acceptable. It's not your fault, and it needs to be addressed. And any closing remarks from you?
Just that, 24/7, 365, whether it's during the emergency incident that you need to call us, or at a time when there isn't anything. Maybe your significant other is at work, and that's your opportunity to come to the police station and talk to a police officer. You don't need to be in the middle of a domestic disturbance to seek help. So come to us at any time. If it happened a week ago and you still want to pursue it criminally, we can do that. If it happened a week ago and you just want resources, or you just want a restraining order, we can do that. But come to us And speaking to the embarrassment aspect we talked about earlier, if you just come to the police station lobby, your neighbors don't need to see cruisers at your house, but we can still offer the same resources, the same protections we would had we gone to your house. So just at any point, whenever you need it, doesn't need to be the middle of a disturbance, come to us. And if it is the middle of the disturbance, of course, call us.
Tremendous. Well, I personally, as a resident of Kingston, feel very proud and feel very secure that people like yourselves are dealing with this very serious issue. Thank you so much for what you do for our community and for the wonderful information you've given all of us. I'm hoping maybe somebody out there, this may touch your life. Anyway, take care. Stay healthy.